But yeah, I was thinking about it, earlier today as I was prepping for the podcast and things like that. But I was thinking about like what bands influenced us and when we came out, and a lot of the albums that you guys just mentioned, Suicide Silence, The Cleansing, This Is Exile, Whitechapel, like a lot of these bands that we think of, like starting deathcore and all that, all those records came out at like the same time, so none of us could influence each other, right? Like ABACABB's influences weren't Suicide Silence and Whitechapel, because their albums came out in 2008. We had already written our Survivalist and submitted it to Sumerian Records in 2008. It took several months or almost a year before it actually came out in 2009, but we had already written it, recorded it, and submitted it a year before. So when those big albums came out, Survivalist was already submitted. So we couldn't be influenced by some of those bands, and granted, some of those bands had albums and EPs or demos and stuff like that before their big break. But back then,
as did you guys, though, and it was a pretty different style as well, right? I think, which is a testament to like not cop. You guys couldn't have been copying Whitechapel in 2005, right?
Our first demos came out in 2004. 5 years before Survivalist. So our influences go deeper, and I think like a lot of those bands, including ABACABB, Suicide Silence, Whitechapel, Job for a Cowboy, I mean, you name it. A lot of those bands were truly influenced by death metal bands and hardcore bands and some metalcore bands, and we were all trying to just mash it together and make it as heavy as possible, and like out came deathcore, and none of us knew what we were doing or knew that we were like, starting a new genre by any means. We were just trying to grab influences from those genres that existed, before deathcore was kind of a thing, so it's very interesting how it all kind of played out, and now granted, later in ABACABB's years, like we were influenced by Whitechapel and Suicide Silence and all these bands, but they were our peers at the time. We were all coming up together. I remember Suicide Silence's first show in Virginia. ABACABB opened up for them in the side room of this shitty bar, and it was insane, but and same with Despised Icon, right? Like one of their first huge shows in Virginia. ABACABB played and in the side room right next to them, and there was a window in between the two rooms, and I looked behind me. I was playing drums at the time, but I looked behind me, and some of the guys from Despised Icon, Alex, is sitting there watching our set and stuff like that, and we've just remained friends ever since. So it's like all these bands were our peers at the time. I remember playing this like really shitty fire hall in front of I don't know, maybe 40 or 50 people with Whitechapel back in like 2005 or 2006 or something, and Elijah and Arsonists Get All the Girls and like Knights of the Abyss and all these bands, we were all influencing each other, but we were all truly influenced by the bands, 5, 10, 20 years before us, and we were just trying to mix genres, I think, but
yeah, which made it really raw, and we keep talking about Despised Icon. It's always cool for us to hear.
I mean, yeah.
It's always cool to hear because we're super proud, right? Like we're French Canadian and they're from here and everything. And every time we hear about the band, it's always about them being humble and cool with people and nice, which is awesome to hear, because some people back in the days, like we heard many stories, right? And some people felt competitive maybe in between the band, but it feels like Despised Icon never did, right? Like they
Despised Icon are those are the best dudes ever. They always helped out ABACABB whenever they could. They put us on one of the, when they called it quits back in like 2010, they put us on their farewell show, or maybe 2012.
I was at because they did 2 farewell shows. shows. You guys were on the first day.
Yeah, Club
I was
Soda,
at the last show, so you guys weren't on it. I was pissed.
Yeah, they so Despised Icon, they always helped us out, and honestly, Despised Icon is one of ABACABB's influences, because they did release a lot of really good music before ABACABB ever released anything, you know. So we were listening to a lot of Despised Icon. All Shall Perish was putting out some music before ABACABB. They influenced us. But I'd say some of our true influences back then, Glass Casket was a big influence for us. Deadwater Drowning was a huge influence for us. Acacia Strain had just come out, and they were a huge influence. So there were some bands, you know, definitely doing deathcore and definitely influencing us on the East Coast here and making a name for themselves for sure.
When you look at some of the older material you guys were playing, though, it was a lot less of the kind of hardcore influenced ABACABB that we have on Survivalist, though. And I think that paints a different picture as well in terms of influences and stuff like that. You mentioned Despised Icon. They also early on were much more like influenced kind of by the grindcore-esque, you know, side of death metal. And you guys were playing with bands like Ed Gain and stuff like that,
yes.
which fit a lot, right? It was kind of like grindcore, mathcore, you know, that's heavy, low. You mentioned Arsonists Get All the Girls. That style of band was like, to me, very early deathcore. A lot of deathcore bands were doing like that kind of wacky, sporadic, you know, heavy music.
Yes, our first demo that came out, you know, 2004, definitely had more of the grind, like chaotic stuff influencing us. And I think that came from Ed Gain, like you said, you know, Pariah, I remember was a band on Black Market Activities, I think. Black Market Activities in general influenced a lot. So it was like From a Second Story Window and, you know, just some of these more chaotic, grindy bands, you know, that we really liked. Into the Moat was more, not grind, but more tech and stuff. So, so we had some influences from like, it was more grindy back then for sure. And then as we got older, got some different members, things like that, started writing Survivalists. Yeah, it got a little bit more, you could say hardcore, even metalcore influence, you know, more chuggy and a little less chaotic, a little less dissonance, you know, chords and stuff like that. So yeah, we evolved, you know.